They tried to steal my $90,000 inheritance, and they didn't do it in a quiet family way with hurt feelings and awkward phone calls. They did it with a full legal attack that accused me of manipulating my dying father, and they backed that attack with a forged handwritten note like they thought the courtroom was just another place where you can talk confidently and reality will bend to whatever story you tell loudest. This all started in January 2026 in Indianapolis, and I'm telling you the point of the story right now so you know what you are listening to from the first minute. My dad died. His will left me the inheritance. My mom and my sister Lily decided that was unacceptable. They went after it. The judge exposed the fraud, and the same people who tried to take it from me ended up ordered to pay $60,000 because they crossed a line they couldn't uncross. I wasn't rich. I wasn't some business shark with a vault and a plan to cut my family off. I was just a guy trying to hold together a normal life, a steady job, and the kind of routine that makes you feel safe when everything else is changing. I worked weekdays in an office that ran on calendars and deadlines and polite emails, and I lived in a small apartment where the heat made that clicking sound at night, and I kept telling myself that adulthood was basically figuring out how to keep the wheels on without panicking. Then my dad got sick, and the wheels started wobbling. The last months of his life were a blur of practical tasks and emotional landmines. Hospice appointments, pharmacy runs, my dad refusing to admit he was scared, me pretending I wasn't either. He was a proud, stubborn man, the type who could fix a leaky sink with 3 tools and a swear word, but he couldn't fix what was happening inside his body. He didn't talk about feelings much, but he was always watching, always paying attention to who showed up, who handled the boring stuff, who kept their word. My sister Lily showed up in bursts. She was the kind of person who could be charming and loving when she felt like it, and exhausting and cruel when she didn't. She always had a reason, always had a crisis, always had a story that made her the victim of bad luck and bad people and bad timing. My mom, meanwhile, had spent years smoothing over Lily's messes like that was her job, and I had spent years being the stable one because someone had to be. None of that felt dramatic when we were living it, it just felt like the roles we'd been assigned, and you don't notice how unfair roles are until something big happens and everyone insists you keep playing yours. My dad died in the fall, and the holidays that year felt strange and hollow, like the world had a missing piece nobody wanted to point at. By early January, I was back at work trying to act normal, and that was when the estate notice hit my inbox on a Friday morning. It was still dark outside, and my kitchen smelled like old coffee and winter air, and I remember the exact moment my eyes landed on the amount. $90,000. It was enough money to change my life in practical ways. Pay off debt, replace my dying car, build a cushion so one emergency didn't wipe me out. It was also a strange emotional thing because it wasn't just money, it was my dad's voice in a legal document, one last decision he made while he still could. The notice listed me as the sole beneficiary, and I sat down at my kitchen table like my legs suddenly needed permission to work. I didn't even have time to process it before my phone lit up. It was my mom. Her voice sounded tight, like she'd been pacing. She said, "You saw the email, right?" I said, "I just opened it." She said, "Then we need to talk about what your father would have wanted." That phrasing hit me in a bad way, because it didn't sound like grief, it sounded like negotiation. It sounded like she was already treating my father's will as a starting point for a new argument. I said, "Mom, it says I am the beneficiary." She took a breath and said, "Your father made mistakes when he was upset." And that line was the moment my chest went cold, because it told me she wasn't asking me to be generous. She was preparing to claim my dad wasn't in his right mind. Then Lily's voice came onto the line, like she'd been sitting right next to my mom waiting for her turn. Lily said, "So you are really going to take everything?" I said, "Lily, this is Dad's will." Lily said, "You always get to be the good one and I get to be the screw-up and now you get the money too." I tried to stay calm because I could already feel how the conversation was turning, like they were dragging me into a trap where anything I said could be twisted into proof that I was selfish. I said, "I did not make this choice, Dad did." Lily said he promised me he would help me and I know he wanted it split. My mom said, "We will handle this the right way." The call ended without resolution, and I just sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I'd stepped onto thin ice without realizing it. That afternoon, while I was trying to pretend I could focus on work, another email hit. This one was from a law office. My mother and Lily had retained counsel and filed a will contest. The language was polite and formal, but it was basically a knife. They accused me of undue influence. They implied fraud. They requested the estate be frozen and investigated. I remember reading it and feeling my heartbeat in my throat, because those words don't just threaten money, they threaten who you are. They were trying to paint me as the kind of person who manipulates a dying parent. They were trying to make a judge believe my dad wasn't my dad anymore at the end, that he was just a confused old man I could steer like a shopping cart. And that was the hook of my life for the next few months. I wasn't just grieving. I was on defense. I was a son being accused of stealing his own father's last decision. When people tell you that money changes people, what they really mean is that money reveals people, because the moment the contest was filed, my family stopped acting like family and started acting like a team trying to win a case. The estate funds were put on hold, and suddenly I had this bizarre situation where my dad's final gift was real enough to fight over but not accessible enough to help me, which felt like being offered a life raft and then told you have to argue for it while you're already in the water. The phone calls started first. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years came out of nowhere, and they didn't call to say they missed my dad. They called to say they heard I was taking everything, like the inheritance was a pie on a table and I was refusing to pass a slice. My aunt left a message telling me to do the decent thing. My cousin texted asking if it was true I kept my dad away from people. Someone at work asked me, casually, if everything was okay at home, and I realized the gossip had spread far enough that it could reach my job if I didn't get ahead of it. Lily went online, which was her favorite weapon, and started posting vague stuff about betrayal, narcissists, and stolen futures. She never used my name, but she didn't have to. Anyone who knew us could connect the dots. And the comments were full of sympathy and encouragement, the kind that feels like gasoline poured on a fire. My mom was subtler. She didn't post. She called. She left voicemails that started soft and ended sharp. She said, "I raised you better than this." She said your father would be ashamed. She said your sister is struggling and you are making it worse. I tried to keep my responses simple because every instinct in me wanted to argue, and I knew arguing was what they wanted. If I got emotional, if I snapped, if I said something ugly, they could point to it as proof I was unstable or spiteful. At first, I honestly believed it might still be fixable. I thought maybe my mom was just panicking. Maybe Lily was spiraling. Maybe they'd calm down when they realized the will was clear. I told myself family fights can get loud and then settle. But legal papers don't settle on their own. And within a week their attorney sent a letter demanding documents, communications, medical records, anything that could be twisted into a narrative that my dad was too weak to decide and I was too involved to be trusted. I started gathering everything. I made folders on my laptop and folders in real life. I pulled Dad's appointment schedules, the hospice notes I had copies of, the email threads with the estate administrator, bank statements showing I had not moved money around. I sat on my couch at night with stacks of paper on my coffee table like I was studying for an exam I never signed up for. Then the new obstacle arrived, and it changed the whole flavor of the fight. They filed what they claimed was my father's handwritten note. It said he wanted the inheritance shared equally between his children. It was dated after he had been on stronger medication. It had his name at the bottom. When I first saw the scanned copy, my stomach dropped hard, because it is a special kind of terror to see your dead father's signature on a document that could undo everything. For a few seconds I doubted myself because grief messes with your certainty, and the idea that maybe my dad wrote something I never saw made me feel like the ground was shifting under me. But then I looked closer. My dad's handwriting was familiar to me in a way you can't fake by just guessing. He wrote in blocky letters, simple and direct, like he was labeling tools in a garage. This note had loops, fancy strokes, and a softness that didn't match him. Spelled my name wrong. It used a date format my dad never used. And the paper looked too clean, too bright, like it came from a fresh printer tray instead of the messy drawer in my dad's desk where he kept old receipts and coupons. I sat there staring at it and my skin went cold. Because if it wasn't real, then someone made it. Someone wrote it. Someone decided to put my father's name on a lie and hand it to the court like a gift. I remember walking into my bedroom that night and sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe like a normal person, and I realized I was shaking. Not because I was scared of losing money, but because I was watching my family do something criminal and act like it was a moral crusade. I went to my dad's grave that weekend because I needed to be near something that was real. It was cold and windy, and the cemetery had that quiet, heavy feeling like the world is holding its breath. I stood there and I said out loud that I wasn't letting them rewrite him. I told him I didn't care how uncomfortable it got. I wasn't going to let a forged note become his final voice. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed, and it was a voicemail from my mom. She said, "Our lawyer says we have a strong case, and if you fight us, we will make sure you regret it." That was the climax of Act 2 for me, because it was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a family misunderstanding. My own mother had just threatened me in a way that sounded less like a parent and more like someone who wants to win at any cost. I wish I could tell you I immediately got help, but I didn't. I spent another couple of weeks trying to out-organize the problem, like if I could just build a perfect binder of evidence it would protect me. I was tired all the time. I stopped eating real meals. I'd open the fridge and stare like I forgot what food was for. My coworkers started asking if I was okay, and I kept saying I was fine, because that's what you say when you are not fine but you don't want your personal life spilling into your job. The unexpected ally showed up in a way that felt almost ridiculous, like the universe was tired of watching me drown. I was at a diner near my office one afternoon, the kind of place where the coffee tastes burnt and nobody pretends it's fancy. I had my laptop open and papers spread out, and I must have looked stressed enough that the waitress asked me if I was all right in a real voice, not the scripted one. I told her, quietly, that my family was trying to take my dad's inheritance and accusing me of fraud. A guy in the next booth turned slightly. He had that worn, practical look of someone who has spent years around other people's problems. He said he didn't mean to eavesdrop, but if it was probate and they were accusing me of undue influence, I needed a lawyer, not just spreadsheets. He said he worked as a paralegal and had seen families destroy each other over less. He slid me a business card and said his boss was a probate attorney named Marissa Caldwell, and that she hated fraud more than she loved billing hours, which was his way of saying she actually cared about the right thing. I called Marissa that same day from my car, sitting in the parking lot with the engine off because my car was starting to sound like it was coughing. She listened. She asked calm questions. She didn't react with shock or pity. She reacted like someone solving a problem. She said, "Do they have the original handwritten note?" I said they filed a scan, but they claim they have it. Marissa said, "Good, we will request the original because forgeries don't hold up well once you shine light on them." Then she said something that unclenched my chest a little. She said, "You are not overreacting and you are not crazy, this is serious." That matters, hearing that from someone who knows the system, because when your own family is telling you that you are selfish and cruel, you start second-guessing your reality. Marissa moved fast. She filed motions to compel the original note. She subpoenaed the notary who witnessed my father sign the will. She requested medical records for the day the will was executed. She asked me for every known handwriting sample I could find. I went through boxes in my closet, drawers, old files, anything. I found a birthday card my dad wrote me years ago, and I sat on my living room floor holding it like it was fragile glass, because it was proof of his handwriting and also just him, a piece of him, and I ended up crying in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry in months. Marissa also asked questions that pushed me past my denial. She said, "Who had access to your father's papers after he passed?" I didn't want to say it. I said my mom kept everything. She said then the note didn't appear by magic. A week later, their attorney delivered the original note in a sealed envelope like it was sacred. Marissa opened it with gloves and a calm face, like she was handling evidence in a crime lab. The paper looked too new. The ink looked too uniform. The signature looked like someone had practiced it. She didn't celebrate. She just nodded and said, "We will let science do what emotion cannot." She sent it to a forensic document examiner, a real one who testifies in court. While we waited, my mom and Lily kept pushing. My mom left messages saying my lawyer was poisoning me. Lily sent texts that were half guilt and half insult. Lily said, "You always hide behind rules because you cannot handle feelings." Lily said, "You think you are better than me." I didn't respond. I let Marissa handle the speaking, because the more I watched this unfold, the more I realized Lily's greatest skill was turning conversations into chaos. Then the report came back. Marissa called me and told me to step outside my office because it was not a conversation for coworkers to overhear. I walked out into the cold, stood near the side entrance, and listened as she told me the note was a forgery. The ink was recent. There were signs of tracing. The handwriting did not match my father's known samples. The paper stock was inconsistent with what he used. Most damning of all, the examiner believed the note was created after my dad died. I leaned against the brick wall because my legs felt weak, and I remember looking up at the gray winter sky and feeling this awful mix of relief and grief. Relief because I wasn't crazy, because my instincts were right. Grief because the truth meant my mother and sister had used my dead father's name as a tool in a scam. That was the climactic moment of Act 3. It wasn't a courtroom win yet. It was the moment I finally had something stronger than their narrative. I had proof. And proof has a weight that guilt trips do not. The courthouse hearing in February 2026 felt like walking into a room where everyone's life was on display in the most unflattering lighting imaginable. The building was downtown, all gray stone and metal detectors. The waiting area smelled like old paper and stress. People were there for divorces, custody fights, civil disputes, and everyone had that same tense posture like they were bracing for impact. My mom arrived wearing a neat coat and pearls like she was going to church. Lily wore a sharp blazer and heavy makeup like she was auditioning for sympathy. They were dressed for the story they wanted to sell. The grieving widow and struggling daughter against the cold, controlling son. Lily looked at me with this little smirk that made my stomach twist. My mom didn't smirk. She gave me that face she used when I was a kid and had disappointed her. The sad head shake that makes you feel guilty even when you don't know what you did. Marissa stood beside me and said, "Keep your face neutral, let them perform." We went into the courtroom. Judge Harold Vance sat at the bench with an expression that said he had seen too many people try to turn feelings into facts. He didn't look cruel. He looked tired in a professional way, like someone who has learned that the truth usually arrives after a lot of noise. My mother's attorney started by talking about fairness and family. He said my father was confused. He implied I isolated him. He presented Lily as financially struggling and emotionally wounded. Lily dabbed at her eyes. My mom held her hand. It was a performance, and I hated how effective performances can be when people want to believe them. Then the attorney brought up the handwritten note like it was the final word. Marissa stood and said, "Your Honor, the note is central, which is why we requested forensic examination and we have a report." She handed copies to the clerk, the judge, and opposing counsel. The judge read silently for a long time. The courtroom got so quiet I could hear someone's coat shift. Lily's foot tapped once and stopped. Judge Vance looked up and asked, "Is this report accurate?" Marissa said, "Yes, Your Honor, and the examiner is present." Judge Vance turned to my mother's attorney and said, "Counsel, are you aware this concludes the note is forged and likely created after the decedent's death?" The attorney tried to pivot. He said they contested the conclusions. He said stress can change handwriting. Judge Vance said stress does not change the age of ink. That line landed like a hammer. I felt my throat tighten because it was so plain and so final, and it cut through the fog of emotion like a blade. Then Judge Vance started asking questions. Who had possession of the note? My mother. Where did she find it? In my husband's desk. When did she find it? Shortly after his passing. Did anyone else have access? My daughter helped sort papers. The judge turned to Lily and asked her directly if she had handled the document or helped create it. Lily said no in a voice that sounded thinner than she wanted. The judge warned them that submitting forged documents can carry serious consequences. Marissa called the forensic examiner to testify. He explained the ink dating, the pressure patterns, the signs of tracing, the mismatches with known handwriting. It wasn't emotional. It was clinical. That was the power. He wasn't guessing. He was explaining evidence. Then came the moment where everything could still go sideways, because my mother's attorney tried one last move. He argued that even if the note was forged, the will should still be contested based on capacity and undue influence. He tried to drag the case back into mud, back into the accusation that I manipulated my father. Judge Vance looked at me and asked the question that made my heart slam against my ribs. He asked, "Did you pressure your father to leave you the estate?" This is the part where I had to draw on something deeper than anger. I stood. I kept my voice steady. I didn't insult my mother. I didn't attack Lily. I told the truth the way you tell it when you know the truth is the only thing that matters. I said, "No, Your Honor, I did not pressure him. I did not know what was in the will until the estate notice arrived. I was taking him to appointments and handling hospice and doing groceries and paperwork, but I was not making decisions for him. I was just trying to be his son." I could feel the room watching me, and I wanted to look at my mother and say, "How could you do this?" But I didn't, because that would have been for me, not for the judge. Marissa then presented the notary testimony and medical documentation showing my father had capacity at the time he executed the will. The notary described my father as oriented and clear. The medical notes supported it. The picture they were trying to paint of a confused, helpless man didn't match the records. Judge Vance leaned forward and said he was going to speak plainly. Someone submitted a forged document to the court. That was fraud. My mother started crying, and this time it looked real. She said she just wanted what was fair. Judge Vance said fairness is not achieved through forgery. Then he ruled. He upheld the will. He dismissed the forged note as inadmissible. He admonished my mother and Lily for submitting fraudulent evidence. And then he went further than I expected. He ordered sanctions. He said due to the severity of the misconduct, the petitioners will pay $60,000 toward the respondents' legal costs and damages related to this fraudulent filing. When I heard $60,000, my brain almost refused to process it. I wasn't cheering. I wasn't happy my family was being punished. I was stunned that the system had actually seen what happened and responded with consequence. That was the climax of Act 4. The moment the fraud collapsed under light, and the people who tried to steal my inheritance got told to pay for the damage they caused. Walking out of the courthouse didn't feel like a movie ending. It felt like stepping into cold air after holding your breath for too long. Marissa shook my hand and told me I did good. That staying calm matters, and I thanked her like my voice had forgotten how to sound normal. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, hands on the steering wheel, staring at traffic, feeling this delayed wave of grief for my dad because the fight had stolen space from my morning. The estate process moved forward fast after the ruling. The funds were released. $90,000 landed in my account, and I stared at the number like it might evaporate. I used it the way my dad would have wanted. I paid off debt that had been hanging over me like a storm cloud. I replaced my dying car with a reliable used one. I finally took care of medical and dental stuff I'd been postponing because I was always one unexpected bill away from panic. I built an emergency fund because nothing is more adult than realizing emergencies are not rare events. They are just part of being alive. The sanctions order was its own messy reality. $60,000 doesn't appear out of nowhere for most people. The court turned it into a judgment and structured repayment. Some of it came from my mom's savings. Some of it came from Lily selling assets she didn't want to part with. Some of it is still being collected through garnishment because consequences do not care if you think you deserve a different outcome. But the real cost was the relationship. My mom didn't call to apologize. She called to say I humiliated her, like I had orchestrated the fraud finding instead of simply defending myself. Lily texted me once and said, "I hope you are happy," and I stared at that message thinking happiness was not the right word. I didn't respond because I didn't trust myself to write something I wouldn't regret. In quiet moments, I caught myself replaying old memories. My mom making pancakes on Saturday mornings, my dad teaching me how to change a tire, Lily laughing when we were kids and the world hadn't gotten so complicated. I wondered how those people could exist in the same story as the people who forged a note and dragged me into court. A few weeks after everything settled, I took a weekend trip alone up toward Michigan. Nothing fancy. A cheap motel, a long drive, the kind of cold lake view that makes you feel small in a good way. I stood near the shore with my hands in my pockets and let the wind hit my face, and I finally let myself miss my dad without needing to defend him like evidence. I talked to him in my head the way you do when someone is gone but still feels present in the decisions you make. I told him I kept the wheels on. I told him I didn't let them rewrite him. Finale Part 5 Aftertaste Reflection, because this is the part people carry with them after the story ends. People ask if I feel guilty that my mom and sister got hit with $60,000 in sanctions. I don't feel guilty about the judge's decision because I didn't choose the fraud. They did. But I do feel a heavy sadness, because no matter how right you are, standing in court against your own family changes you. It teaches you that love without boundaries can turn into a trap, And it teaches you that some people confuse fairness with entitlement, and when they do, they will justify things they never would have justified in calmer times. Here is the moral dilemma I still live with. If your family hurts you in a way that crosses into betrayal and criminal behavior, do you forgive because you want the idea of family back? Or do you protect yourself because forgiving without accountability just invites the next attack? I don't have a neat answer. I have days when I miss my mom's voice before it turned sharp. I have days when I remember Lily as a kid and wonder what happened to that version of her. I also have days when I listen to that old voicemail in my head, the one where my mom said she would make me regret fighting, and I know I can't pretend that didn't happen just because it hurts to accept it. So the ending is open in a real way. I won the case. I kept my father's last wishes intact. I protected my name. I also lost the illusion that blood automatically means safety. Maybe someday my mom will understand that she didn't lose because I was stubborn. She lost because she tried to win with a lie. Maybe Lily will grow up enough to see that being struggling does not give you permission to steal. Or maybe they won't. What I know is this. If someone tells you that setting a boundary is selfish, especially when grief and money are involved, pay attention. Because sometimes the boundary is the only thing protecting your sanity. The inheritance was $90,000, yes, but the deeper inheritance was the lesson that you can stand up for yourself without becoming cruel, you can tell the truth without screaming it, and you can walk out of a courthouse with your head up even when your heart is cracked. And if you are ever in the middle of something like this, where people try to guilt you into surrendering to a lie, remember that the truth does not need to be loud. It needs to be steady.